Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Happy Juneteenth. Today, we will be discussing the 2020 United States Senate election in Montana. This is the first Senate race I will cover in the competitive 2020 Senate elections. And after the respective primaries, incumbent Republican Steve Daines will be facing off against Montana Governor Steve Bullock, who won the Democratic nomination. So let's give this some race, or let's give this race some background. So let's go back to 2014. Steve Daines was the at-large representative for Montana's at-large U.S. House district as a Republican. He was a freshman representative to win this open Senate seat that was vacated by Democratic Senator Max Baucus, who retired after being in the Senate for a very long time to become the ambassador to China. Um, so previously, this race was expected to be a safe Republican race, or likely at minimum. But since Bullock decided to enter the race on the last day, actually, after saying for months he wasn't going to run, and then he changed his mind at the last second, this race is now thought to be a competitive election, and a lot of people have this as a consensus toss-up now. Cook Political Report just changed their rating yesterday as of June 18th to toss-up. I would not be surprised if the crystal ball changes. I believe the crystal ball is most accurate to toss-up soon. And, most of the polling recently, I don't necessarily think polls should be, believed all the time, but they've shown a very, very close race, and I think that's in line with what we can expect. So as you all may remember, Steve Bullock he's the two-term governor of Montana. He was elected in 2012 and re-elected in 2016 on the same ballot as Donald Trump in Montana. And he decided to run for president first, and then he got no traction, and so now he's the Senate nominee. But so now let's move on to why this is a competitive election. So Bullock is a very popular and very well-liked governor in Montana. So if we go to the Morning Consult approval ratings, this is of the first quarter in 2020. If you can look, you will see that Bullock has a 52% approval rating and a 31% disapproval rating with 17% undecided. Now that's actually more than Steve Daines, who's got a 47% approval rating and a 31% disapproval rating. So that's pretty considerable. And aside being just a very popular governor, he was the Attorney General of Montana before, and he was elected in 2008. So he's won 3 statewide races in presidential years when the state of Montana has gone for the Republican nominee. At the state level, he's won it 3 times with McCain, Romney, and Trump all on the ballot. So he's proven he can win with Trump on the ballot. And he was a very bipartisan governor. He expanded Medicaid, got rid of dark money in Montana state politics, and apparently he also passed a very big law that gave all Montanans access to Montana state-owned public lands. And if you've seen his TV ads, you'll notice that's a big part of his appeal. But okay, let's move on. So during this coronavirus pandemic, Bullock has basically gotten a ton of free media attention, and as you can see, there has been recent polling done that's showing that he has a 75% approval rating in Montana from this pandemic, and Daines' approval rating was only about 55% in terms of response to the pandemic. But basically, he's been getting a ton of media attention, and it's been positive, so that really helps him. Now moving on to the bigger picture, which is Montana as itself, its voting habits. Montana is way less hostile to Democrats than Idaho, Wyoming, and the Dakotas, which are its border states. A large part of its electorate that usually decides the elections are leaning libertarians, or they lean libertarian, and they're split-ticket voters. And Montana has been very, very consistent in the way they split their votes. And what I mean by that is I want to go to the 2018 elections, and then I want to talk about how this has been consistent back to all the way in 2004. Believe it or not, Montana has not elected a Republican governor since the year 2000. They've had a Democratic governor since 2004. But as you can see in 2018, Jon Tester was reelected to a third term in Montana. That was surprising because of all the red state senators, and Bill Nelson in Florida, Heitkamp in North Dakota, Donnelly of Indiana, McCaskill of Missouri. He survived, which was considerable because if you look at this margin, about the same margin for Senate as the 2018 House election, it was very close, which means that if you take a look at these margins, it was about 18 or 19,000 split ticket voters who decided his reelection. I mean, they gave Gian-eh-fort the win and they went for Tester. So, there's a lot of split ticket voters in Montana, but they've been very consistent in the pattern in which they split their tickets. So what I mean by that, these are the recent gubernatorial elections in which he won. Bullock in 2016 on the same ballot. It was almost a very close margin, almost the exact same margin as 2016, which is considerable. I mean, Trump destroyed Clinton in the state of Montana, and Bullock won re-election by about 20,000 votes. So that's considerable. Let's go back to 2004, and I'll explain why Montana's been consistent. So if we go back, as you can see, the governor before Bullock was Democrat Brian Schweitzer, I believe is that how you pronounce it. But as you can see, in presidential election years, Montana has a pattern, and that pattern is for presidential and U.S. House elections, for their at-large House election, and in presidential elections, they've always voted Republican since 2004. For U.S. House as well, that would be, considering there was a special election, it's every 2 years, that would be difficult to go back, but I did go back and look. Since 2004, they've elected to a House to the U.S., or a Republican to the U.S. House, not a House to the U.S. Republican, every single year since 2004, and they've elected, in this case, a Democratic governor on the exact same ballot as they've elected, or voted for George W. Bush, John McCain, and then Romney and Trump, and they elected a Democratic governor all the same years, which is considerable. So the only other way that they split their tickets is, aside from 2014, which was a red wave, you have to understand that, in Montana, they split their votes, it seems, for the U.S. House and presidency, or they split their votes for the House and the presidency, and then they vote for Democratic governors and Democratic senators, which is really strange, but this has been consistent. So, like in 2012, for example, they elected Mitt Romney, or they voted for Mitt Romney. They elected a U.S. Republican, or a Republican to the U.S. House for Montana, and that was actually Steve Daines. So Daines, Tester, and Bullock were all on the same ballot in 2012. Tester and Bullock and Daines won. They all had split-ticket voters, which is really strange because this basically, means that in 2020, you're going to have voters who have voted for both Bullock and Daines, these split-ticket voters, that are going to decide the election, basically at the forefront. And I don't think Trump is going to be able to help Steve Daines in this case, and my reason being is because Bullock's more popular than Trump in Montana, and for people who aren't as politically inclined, there was an instance, I believe it was 2017, where this was by far the Montana Senate election, the most personal race for Trump. The reason being is because Tester sunk the nomination of this guy named Ronnie Jackson, who I believe he was Trump's personal doctor, but there was a lot of scandal surrounding him. About him basically giving out pills like opioids without a prescription, some drunk driving accidents. Apparently he was an alcoholic, and these were legitimate accusations. His nickname was apparently the Candy Man, and I believe he wanted him either Surgeon General or I think Surgeon General was the position. Trump got really, really pissed off at Jon Tester for doing that. He went to the state of Montana 4 times to try and get Tester out. He did not succeed. The people of Montana were not, deterred by Trump. They wanted Tester to stay, and they elected a Republican to the House all the same. So, that is, not working well for Daines in terms of history and split ticket voters, because the split ticket voters, if you just to go by history, Trump will win in 2020 in Montana. I mean, that's a likely election for Trump too in Montana, and then they're likely going to elect Matt Rosendale, the 2018 Republican nominee for Senate and the current Montana state auditor, to the U.S. House for the open seat being vacated by the current incumbent representative who's actually running for governor. And then if history holds, they should elect Mike Cooney, who is he was the lieutenant governor of Montana, Mike Cooney, and he's running against Greg Gian-eh-fort, who was also the nominee in 2016, and then he ran for a special election in the U.S. House. This is considered a toss-up, but if history holds, Cooney should win, but I don't know what the result will be. It's a toss-up, and it's going to be very close regardless. But just to think about it, it's almost ominous that it's just favoring Bullock. But that's to say Daines will have the advantage because he's the incumbent, but it's not as much of an advantage because of all the publicity and the fact that he's running against the sitting governor who's popular of the state of Montana. And I think personally that of the four major statewide races in Montana, aside from state executive offices, being U.S. Senate, U.S. House, presidential, and governor, I would not be surprised if the Democrats held the governorship and picked up the Senate seat, because that's just the voting patterns of Montanans. It's really strange. I don't know why that's the case. I'd love people in the comments to say why that's the case. They're very, very libertarian. And Bullock's more popular than Daines, but I would say they at least get one win, either this Senate race or retain the governorship. But my money personally is on Bullock because he's got more publicity, and I would not be surprised if these polls come out, all these races lean to toss-up. I personally think this race is going to be tilted in Bullock's favor, but I think that's as far as it's going to go. But I do think Bullock will edge out Daines by about 15,000 votes, because that's been very consistent. If you look at the split ticket voters, it was about the same people voted in 2018 as 2016 in Montana. And Trump's not going to be able to help Daines, as I already said, but I feel like it's going to be very, very close. But I do think Bullock will edge out Daines by about 10 to 15,000 votes. And, I feel like this is one of the most important toss-up races of the 2020 Senate elections, as, if they don't manage to knock off Susan Collins, the Democrats, or Tom Tillis in North Carolina, and they get, Arizona, Colorado, and actually, let's say they do get Maine for this example, and let's say Biden beats Trump, and they hold Michigan and lose Alabama. They still need one for a majority. This could be the one. Or let's say, for example, Trump wins re-election and they win North Carolina. Let's say Montana would be the one that puts McConnell in the minority. But either way, I expect Montana's Senate race in 2020 to be one of the most watched, well-funded, inexpensive. Like I think there's going to be at least tens of millions of dollars that are going to be spent on both sides. But I think this is arguably the second most important Senate election of 2020, and I will definitely be watching this race, and everybody else should too, because this is going to be one for the record books. Well, anyways, that is today's video. I hope y'all enjoyed, and don't forget to leave a comment, like the video, and or subscribe. See you later.